Bob reaches the outskirts of the convent. Hidden behind a sand dune, he raises his rifle and scans the area. At the same time, Lockjaw has already taken Willa into custody and is preparing to load her into a vehicle. Seeing his daughter about to be driven away, Bob takes his rifle and takes aim at Lockjaw's car. Lockjaw then transports Willa to a remote desert outpost where Avanti is waiting. Lockjaw orders Avanti to take the girl to the Salton Sea and eliminate her. When Avanti arrives with Willa at the isolated location, he freezes. He can't bring himself to harm a minor. In a sudden burst of conscience, he turns on the armed men, killing them in seconds, but not before taking a fatal bullet himself. In the chaos, Willa grabs Avanti's car and peels out, speeding into the desert to escape. The movie begins with Perfidia Beverly Hills walking past an immigration detention center. She meets her group of friends, who call themselves the French 75, near the U.S.-Mexico border. In the group are her boyfriend Ghetto Pat Calhoun, Deandra Laredo, and Jungle. Together, they plan a big mission, to break into the detention center and free the people being held there. They bring weapons, explosives, and tear gas. Perfidia tells Pat to make a loud distraction so the guards will look away. That night, the team sneaks in through fences and tunnels, quietly taking down guards and freeing the prisoners, while everyone else helps people escape. Perfidia goes inside the main command tent and faces Captain Stephen J. Lockjaw. She tells him that what they're doing is a war against injustice. The team ties up Lockjaw and other guards, declaring them prisoners of the French 75. Once the mission is done, the group escapes in a car, shouting about revolution as fireworks go off behind them. Later, they celebrate their success and Pat and Perfidia grow closer. Soon after, they start making bombs for their next attack. Pat carefully builds the main charge, while Perfidia makes sure the detonator stays safe until the right time. Perfidia then calls from a public phone and warns that a bomb has been planted at a political office. Moments later, a huge explosion shakes the city. Standing in the street, Perfidia declares that only revolutionary action can bring change. Over time, the French 75 plant more bombs at government buildings, campaign offices, and even power towers, cutting electricity to the whole city. Meanwhile, Captain Lockjaw secretly follows them, watching every move. In another mission, Perfidia and Pat dress up in disguises to sneak into a courthouse. They hide a bomb in the ventilation system, but just as Perfidia is setting the detonator, Lockjaw catches her. He gives her a choice: finish what she started or walk away, and hints that they should meet later that night at a hotel. At the hotel, Perfidia meets Captain Lockjaw, just like he asked. She sleeps with him, but she never lets him be in control. Then the story jumps to a wide, open field. Perfidia is very pregnant, but she is still firing a machine gun while Pat and the others laugh at her crazy behavior. That night, everyone sits around a campfire. Perfidia talks to Jungle, warning that if Pat treats her differently after the baby is born, there will be big problems. Pat overhears this and wonders if Perfidia even understands that she is about to become a mother. Later, Perfidia sleeps on Pat's couch. Pat talks to his mom, Jenny, who says she doesn't think Pat is good for Perfidia. She says Pat can't take care of her or the baby. Pat says the baby comes from a line of revolutionaries, but Jenny argues that Perfidia isn't a true revolutionary and Pat is too cold and strict. Time passes, and Perfidia gives birth to a baby girl named Charlene. But instead of feeling happy, Perfidia starts to feel jealous of her own baby because Pat pays all his attention to Charlene. She starts to feel invisible, like she doesn't matter anymore. Eventually, Perfidia realizes she won't stay with him and the baby, so she leaves them to return to her life as a revolutionary. The story then follows Pat. He is buying baby supplies at a store when Captain Lockjaw suddenly appears. Lockjaw asks about the baby's name. When Pat says Charlene, Lockjaw makes a creepy comment about liking black girls. Pat feels scared and confused, and the tension between them grows. Soon, Perfidia and the French 75 rob a bank. Jungle jumps on the counter and shouts that they're doing this for resistance. But things fall apart when Perfidia shoots and kills a security guard who tries to grab his gun. The robbery becomes a disaster, ending in a huge car chase. Their van breaks down and Perfidia runs until Lockjaw and his team catch her in a small alley. Her face is bruised as she is pushed away in a wheelchair while police and FBI agents cheer for her arrest. Lockjaw visits Perfidia in the hospital where she is held. He coldly tells her she will spend decades in prison unless she tells him where the rest of the French 75 members are hiding. Meanwhile, Pat decides that he and Charlene are in danger. With help from a friend, he sends his daughter to a safe sanctuary city called Bacton Cross. They change their names and pretend to be a new family called Bob and Willa Ferguson. Perfidia is placed into the Witness Protection Program, but many members of the French 75, like May, Laredo, and Jungle, are hunted down and killed by Captain Lockjaw. Perfidia once said, "I'm bringing justice." But in the end, Captain Lockjaw gets a big government award for everything he did, even though he hunted the French 75 and arrested Perfidia. 16 years pass after the revolution. Perfidia's daughter, Willa Ferguson, is now 16 years old. At school, she shows off her karate skills with her purple belt. Her father, Bob, who used to be Pat, watches her nervously because he is very protective. Bob meets Willa's history teacher. The teacher talks about how Willa is a great student and a leader at school. Bob says she grew up without her mother, and tears fall from his eyes. He still carries a lot of sadness about his past and the sacrifices he made to keep Willa safe. The scene switches to two soldiers talking to Colonel Lockjaw. Lockjaw gets angry and cuts them off, wanting to know if everyone understands how serious things are. He is picked up by a fancy black SUV and taken to a big, fancy room. Inside, rich and powerful men greet him. One of them is Virgil Throckmorton, who says Lockjaw has done amazing work stopping uncontrolled migration. Then Throckmorton explains why Lockjaw is here. They want to make him a member of a secret group called the Christmas Adventurers Club. This group uses military experts to hunt dangerous people. Since a member named Jim Kringle recently died, there is an open spot. But before Lockjaw can join, he must pass a vulnerability test, which is like a super strict background check to see if he has any moral weaknesses. Lockjaw agrees. Throckmorton looks pleased and leaves the room. Lockjaw stays behind, his face red like he is trapped between regret and ambition. The story then moves to a man riding a tram. He is wearing glasses and is a member of the old French 75. He looks scared and suspicious of everyone. While broadcasting from his home later, he is suddenly attacked by secret military operatives. They think he has been starting fires and causing trouble, so they kidnap him. Two boys who witnessed Howard's arrest send out a danger signal to alert the remaining French 75 members still alive. In the interrogation room, the captured man is identified as Howard Somerville, known as Billy Goat, a former associate of Bob who once helped Bob and Willa acquire their new identities. Howard has been captured by the indigenous bounty hunter of Antiq. The information extracted during the interrogation finally gives Lockjaw the identities and location he has been searching for, the false names Bob and Willa Ferguson and their presence in Bacton Cross. This data becomes the foundation of his plan to deploy a large force while gathering intelligence on drugs, youth hangouts, and other points that will make the operation easier. The scene shifts to an old house where Bob faces Willa as their strained relationship begins to crack under the weight of their past. Willa questions him about coming home late and brings up their old group, while Bob tries to distract her with a story about his friend Albert and vintage musical equipment. She grows more frustrated and unleashes her anger about the car, about responsibility, and about her fear of him driving drunk and crashing into a telephone pole. Their conversation becomes emotional when Bob misquotes a proverb about dice, and Willa corrects him with a cynical tone before telling him to leave and act like an adult. Bob tries to admit his faults and compliment Willa's courage, but he still appears disappointed and sad. When a red car pulls up outside the cabin window, the tension rises as Bob wonders who has arrived. A boy comes to the door calling for Willa. Bob confronts him, asks his intentions, and whispers a cold warning not to try anything. After Willa leaves with her friends, Bob sighs deeply and sits alone on the sofa, watching the Battle of Algiers. The house phone rings. He answers casually at first, but his expression shifts when he hears an old greeting code from the caller. He struggles to recall the code he has not used in years. The message becomes clear. Howard Somerville, Billy Goat, has been kidnapped, and the hammer has been launched toward Bacton Cross, a signal that a major operation is underway. Realizing he is now a target, Bob switches into full alert, but his drug-damaged mind makes it difficult to remember the codes. He flees the house before Lockjaw's men can capture him. Lockjaw attempts to lure him out, but Bob escapes through a tunnel. Bob then goes to a public phone to call someone and arrange a meeting point with Willa, but he cannot remember the answer to the question, "What time is it?" Unable to give the correct response, he fails to convince the person on the other end to provide the information he needs. Lockjaw's forces shift their operation to the high school hosting the dance. Soon, operatives enter the school and begin questioning Willa's friends. In the bathroom, Willa communicates with Deandra through her father's inherited scanner, recalling Pat's message to trust the device's owner completely. Deandra urges her to leave immediately. They push through the crowded dance floor together and make it to the waiting camper van. During the tense escape, Willa asks about her father's fate, and Deandra replies that Pat is trained and knows what he has to do. Bob then goes to Sergio's dojo seeking help and again tries to reach the contact person to secure a meeting point, but the call becomes chaotic, filled with tangled codes, threats, and taunts exchanged between underground organizers. And the question is, what time is it? What is your name? I need to know your name. Bob confesses his past as part of the French 75 and admits the bad habits that have followed him for decades. The conversation ends with an agreement on a shelter location, a compound called Sisters of the Brave Bush, located in the hills, with its coordinates delivered in a rushed tone. Amid the chaos, Bob hands his weapon to OG and prepares his escape via the rooftop toward a car waiting in Lapham's alley. Sergio encourages him to stay strong. Bob shouts, before disappearing, while Sergio drops through a trapdoor in the floor and seals it with wooden planks, leaving the apartment empty when the troops finally storm in. In another interrogation room, officers pressure the teenagers, forcing them to reveal Willa's phone number. Threats and intimidation eventually make one of them confess that the number is saved under the name Hello Kitty. When the phone begins to ring, Deandra catches it and throws Willa's phone out the car window. A radio report soon states that Willa's phone is moving south on Highway 135. The troops who failed to capture Sergio pull back from the corridor, while on the dark blue rooftops of the city, the silhouettes of Bob and his companions continue their escape. The flight ends badly as Bob runs through a narrow alley, falls, and collapses in exhaustion. Sergio's next report confirms Bob's downfall, saying he has fallen 12 meters into a tree and has been captured by officers using a taser. Deandra takes Willa to the next meeting point, a hidden convent of revolutionary nuns who once knew Peridia as the Rat, but ultimately trust Willa to carry out her mission there. Willa is devastated to learn that her mother had betrayed her comrades rather than being the hero Bob always believed. The scene shifts to a dark blue Ford Mustang Shelby GT350 speeding through an upscale Beverly Hills neighborhood before stopping in front of an elegant Spanish colonial house. Tim steps out and is greeted by Alice, politely declines banana pancakes and heads downstairs through a hidden tunnel into a secret meeting room. There, he is welcomed by Virgil Throckmorton, Phil Desmond, and Roy Moore. They exchange greetings, Merry Christmas, and Hail St. Nick phrases that feel disturbingly out of place for such a gathering. Roy asks Tim to confirm a growing rumor that Colonel Stephen J. Lockjaw is suspected of fathering a mixed-race child, a claim based on old documents from his time in the jungle. Bill then reveals that Lockjaw personally hired Avanti Q to capture Howard Somerville, the former French 75 member who had smuggled undocumented immigrants and helped establish a sanctuary city. Tim connects the dots and realizes this ties back to Perfidia Beverly Hills, the former French 75 member who vanished from witness protection. Seeing this as a betrayal of their core ideology, Virgil issues an order: Tim must kill both Lockjaw and Willa. The story shifts to a cramped interrogation room, where Bob Ferguson, now captured, sits slumped in a metal chair as an officer yells at him to stop banging his head on the table. The officer demands his real name. Bob stalls by giving joke identities, first Batman, then Peter Parker. The officer snaps, warning that things will get worse if Bob doesn't cooperate. Finally cornered, Bob gives in and identifies himself as Jim Parker. After the interrogation, the now Jim Parker is transported to a hospital. A nurse calmly checks his vitals and begins running through his medical history, asking whether he is diabetic and if he has taken his insulin, questions that unsettle Bob. As she draws his blood, she quietly whispers urgent instructions. Cross through the bathroom. Far right. Emergency exit. Now. Bob double-checks her words in disbelief, then launches himself out of the room and into the emergency stairwell, where Sergio St. Carlos waits with a red sports car. Bob throws his arms around Sergio in pure relief, calling him Sensei and my brother, his voice thick with emotion. They crack open cans of Modelo beer and toast their escape. Bob laughs, shouting that they actually made it, and asks where they're headed next. Sergio answers, the Sisters of the Brave Bush, deep in the Chupacabra Hills. The story cuts to a long, empty desert road where a black SUV screeches to a halt at a crossroads. Colonel Steve Lockjaw steps out, marches toward a bearded shopkeeper, and coldly demands information. Under pressure, the man admits seeing a gray van heading north on Crow Creek Road. When Lockjaw asks what exactly lies in the Chupacabra Hills, the man hesitates before explaining that the area is home to a convent of nuns who grow marijuana. Learning that their numbers range from 10 to 20 women, Lockjaw orders his team to advance. Lockjaw and his operatives soon reach the convent where Willa is hiding. He enters the church and finds her already bound to a chair. Without hesitation, he pulls on black gloves, swabs the inside of her mouth, and inserts the sample into a handheld SwiftKit ID device for instant paternity testing. He tells her that if the genetic lines don't match, she walks free, but if they do, she's in serious danger. Willa stays defiant, even tied to the chair. When Lockjaw asks whether she thinks she's his daughter, she snaps that no matter what the test says, she already has a father, and it's not him. Lockjaw's fury boils over. He insults her mother and presses the button. The lines on the screen align. He repeats his threat in a cold, measured tone, making it clear the result seals her fate. Meanwhile, on the way to the rendezvous point, police spot Bob and Sergio driving across the desert with open containers of beer. Sergio hits the gas, trying to create a moment for Bob to jump from the moving vehicle. Bob freezes, too terrified to leap, forcing Sergio to physically shove him out. Bob tumbles onto the desert floor, shakes off the dust, and locates another car. He hotwires it and speeds toward the convent alone. After a grueling drive, Bob reaches the outskirts of the convent. Hidden behind a sand dune, he raises his rifle and scans the area. At the same time, Lockjaw has already taken Willa into custody and is preparing to load her into a vehicle. Seeing his daughter about to be driven away, Bob takes his rifle and takes aim at Lockjaw's car. Lockjaw then transports Willa to a remote desert outpost where Avanti is waiting. Lockjaw orders Avanti to take the girl to the Salton Sea and eliminate her. When Avanti arrives with Willa at the isolated location, he freezes. He can't bring himself to harm a minor. In a sudden burst of conscience, he turns on the armed men, killing them in seconds, but not before taking a fatal bullet himself. In the chaos, Willa grabs Avanti's car and peels out, speeding into the desert to escape. Elsewhere, Lockjaw, convinced Willa's death has been handled, drives alone along a desolate road. Suddenly, another car pulls up beside him. Without warning, the driver, Tim Smith, fires a shotgun blast directly into Lockjaw, knocking him unconscious and sending his SUV careening off the roadside. Bob drives past the crash site a little later. He fears the worst, but instead of finding Willa, he finds Lockjaw lying on the ground, not moving. Meanwhile, Willa sees Tim Smith getting closer. Bob spots her from a distance and races his car toward her. Willa reaches the top of a hill, hides behind a big rock, and watches as Smith comes in too fast. He doesn't notice another car parked ahead and slams right into the back of it. Smith crawls out of the crashed car and walks toward Willa. She tries speaking to him using a set of secret revolutionary codes. When he can't answer any of them, she realizes he's not an ally, so she shoots him before he can grab her. Moments later, Bob arrives, jumps out of his car, and finally reunites with Willa. He holds her tightly, relieved that she is still alive. Elsewhere, Lockjaw wakes up from the attack, but his face is horribly injured. He drags himself back to the headquarters of the Christmas Adventurers. Furious, he claims Perfidia reverse-raped him. The organization pretends to reward him with a promotion and tells him to wait in his new office. But it's a trap. Poison gas fills the room, and Lockjaw dies. Later, his body is thrown into a furnace. Back home, Bob and Willa finally return to their quiet house. Bob gives Willa a letter from Perfidia, written long ago when Willa was still called Charlene. The letter helps Willa understand her mother's choices and gives her a sense of peace. As they sit together, the radio plays news about a massive protest happening soon in Oakland. Willa stands up, hugs her father, and tells him she needs to go join the protest. Bob lets her go, watching proudly as she walks toward her future.